The mayor of New York City says its beaches will look more like this on Memorial Day 2020. Swimming won't be allowed, lifeguards won't be around, but people will be able to walk along the beach. Elsewhere in the state, some beaches will be open with rules in place. One of the big ones being that they can only allow 50% of their usual crowds. New York has been the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in America. One state south, New Jersey, says all of its beaches will be open to visitors. During a test run this past weekend in Ocean City, a loudspeaker reminded people every 15 minutes to keep their distance from each other when walking along the beach or the boardwalk. Beaches are open again in Georgia and some parts of Texas, though local areas may still have rules in place. In Florida, it really depends on where you go. Some beaches are shut down. Some are open to locals only. And on the other side of the country, beaches have reopened in Los Angeles County, California, but people have to stay at least 6 feet away from one another, wear masks whenever they're not in the water, and they're not allowed to sunbathe, picnic, ride bikes, or play organized sports. And in Washington State, beaches are still closed. This one's in the Bay of Bengal in the northern Indian Ocean, and it could cause catastrophic problems for northeastern India and the nation of Bangladesh. Its name is Cyclone Amphan. It's been hovering at or near the strongest classification of hurricane strength. The good news is it's expected to lose some of that strength as it approaches land, so that could make it less destructive than it is now. The bad news is Amphan is expected to make landfall in a part of the world that is not well equipped to deal with it. The storm is headed toward poor areas with a lot of people and not a lot of good infrastructure, like transportation and communications networks. It's expected to make landfall near the Ganges River Delta, where the Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers empty into the Bay of Bengal, and that could bring major storm surges, a rise in seawater levels blown ashore by a cyclone. Natural disasters are common in this part of the world, but this could be the first time a powerful storm hits India and Bangladesh during a disease pandemic. Both countries are seeing increasing cases and deaths from COVID-19 despite extending their lockdowns until the end of this month. So first responders could be called on to both rescue people and help protect them from coronavirus, which will be a concern, especially in crowded evacuation centers. In the ongoing fight against COVID-19, nations around the world are increasingly turning to technology to track the disease. This isn't just about testing to find out who's had it. It's about finding out where someone who's tested positive has been, whom he or she might have interacted with, and then telling those people that they might have been exposed to the disease. So let's say you go to a party and someone there later tests positive for coronavirus. You could get a call or text in the days afterward saying you might have been exposed and that you should stay home and socially distance yourself for 14 days. The intent is that this could prevent you from spreading COVID-19 before you even know you have it. This form of tracking is called contact tracing. It requires a lot of workers to do it, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control says it's a key strategy for preventing the spread of coronavirus. But those concerned about privacy say contact tracing could cause a lot of problems. For one thing, your smartphone can be used without you being told about it to learn a lot about the places you go, the time you spend there, and the people you see based on their smartphone info. Critics say anyone with access to this data could use it illegally to track information people expect to be kept private. They're not only concerned about the mass surveillance of Americans, they're also uneasy about the possibility of this data still being collected even after the threat of the coronavirus has passed. So contact tracing, while useful, is controversial.
This is one of the worst hit countries, and India saw another record daily increase in cases, bringing that total now to more than 101,000 cases. And you compare that to neighbor Pakistan, which has nearly 44,000, you do see that India is, relatively speaking, in worse shape.
Here in South Korea, high school seniors are heading back to schools this Wednesday, and it really feels like a milestone in the country's fight against coronavirus. Temperature checks, hand sanitizers, social distancing, both in the classroom and at lunchtime, are really becoming the new norm. In the cafeterias, for example, here in this school in central Seoul, they have plastic partitions between people eating. Every other seat is kept vacant because that is the one place that they will be allowed to take off their masks. Apart from that, they have to wear masks on campus for the rest of the day. Now, there have been a couple of first day hurdles. We know that dozens of schools in a city just west of Seoul have had to close again after two confirmed cases within the student body. Now, the officials say that they're doing this out of precaution to make sure they can contact trace and pinpoint exactly where those students caught that virus. Paula Hancock, CNN Seoul.
This is BBC World News. I'm David Eads. The headlines. European Union tourism ministers have failed to reach common agreement on reopening borders as concerns grow about the economic impact of prolonged closure. Several member states called for increased financial support for the tourism sector. In Afghanistan, the UN is warning of rising numbers of civilian casualties from conflict at the same time as the country's hospitals are struggling to deal with the rapid spread of the coronavirus epidemic. At least 19 people are known to have died as Cyclone Amphan, one of the most powerful South Asian storms in decades, hit parts of Bangladesh and eastern India. Nearly 3 million people were evacuated from at-risk areas. And floodwaters have forced the evacuation of around 10,000 people in the American state of Michigan, where record rainfall caused 2 dams to fail on Tuesday.
This is AP News Minute. Dow Chemical says there's no sign of old chemicals escaping during the massive floods in central Michigan. The floods are sweeping through Midland, where Dow was founded and where toxic chemicals were dumped years ago. President Trump is sticking to his claim linking vote by mail to voter fraud and threatened to withhold federal funds from 2 states. Michigan and Nevada are making vote by mail easier due to the coronavirus. The aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt returned to sea Thursday after nearly 2 months in Guam. COVID-19 had swept through the ship, and 1,800 crew members stayed on land, many still quarantined. 2 U.S. astronauts are in Florida preparing to blast off in a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule next week. It'll be the first manned space launch from U.S. soil in about 9 years. Ed Donahue, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
Coastal communities of northeastern India and Bangladesh are assessing the damage from Cyclone Amphan. At one point, it was the most powerful storm ever recorded in the Bay of Bengal. It was the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane, but by the time Amphan made landfall on Wednesday, it had weakened to Category 2 status with sustained wind speeds of 105 miles per hour. Still, its storm surge brought flooding to coastal areas, and water and debris have made it difficult for rescuers to get to survivors. The cyclone killed at least 80 people and destroyed the homes of thousands more. And even though an estimated 3 million were evacuated in India and Bangladesh before the storm arrived, that in itself brought an additional challenge of keeping them separated in shelters because of the threat of coronavirus. Globally, health officials say more than 5 million people have now tested positive for the disease, and while most of them have or will recover, more than 300,000 deaths have been blamed on COVID-19 throughout the world.
Hello, you're watching BBC World News. I'm David Eads, and these are the headlines. China's political leaders are attending the National People's Congress in Beijing. This was due to take place in March, was postponed because of the coronavirus pandemic. One controversial new security law for Hong Kong is expected to be voted through. Pro-democracy activists and politicians in Hong Kong have taken to the streets. They say that this new law could mean the end of the region's autonomy. The legislation could see demonstrators charged with treason. The son of the murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi says the family's forgiven his killers. Salah Khashoggi's father, a critic of the Saudi authorities, was dismembered inside the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul in 2018. A team of UK scientists think they've identified a coronavirus treatment using cells from our own bone marrow to fight the virus.
This is AP News Minute. The Georgia man who videotaped the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery is now under arrest. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation says William Bryan faces charges including felony murder. The FBI is calling a shooting at a naval air station in Corpus Christi, Texas, terrorism-related. The Thursday morning attack injured one sailor. The gunman is dead. President Trump toured a Michigan Ford factory that now makes ventilators. He wore no mask despite a state law requiring one. Michigan's Attorney General says the president may not be allowed back into enclosed facilities in the state. Authorities in central Michigan say it could take days for the region's massive floods to recede. There's also concern that flooding could dislodge toxic chemicals that were dumped decades ago. Ed Donahue, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.